longer. All right, why don't we go ahead and get started. I want to welcome all the guests that have logged in for the annual meeting. And what we're going to do is hold our usual monthly team meeting, but we're going to switch the agenda around a little bit. We've divided our Bright Star Monitor team into 5 groups, as you can see from the agenda. The science branch, the technical branch, software, engineering, and business development. And I think the whole concept here, and this is really the brainchild of Arnie, is to develop a network of small telescopes to look at the brighter stars in the sky that are easily overlooked by the bigger telescopes, and show that we can do good science with this. And it reminds me many years ago when I was advised in terms of the area of medical research that I was interested in going into, is to choose something that is often overlooked by other people. And I think with all the emphasis on large telescopes and looking back to the origins of time and space, you look right past the things right next to you. And so I think this is a really important project. We've learned a lot of things over the years, and hopefully we can continue to do good science here. And in addition to doing good science, we want to integrate into the other missions of the AVSO in terms of educational support, in terms of, and not just with science, but also with issues of engineering and IT, and hopefully to inspire young people and to provide a resource for members who don't have access to their own equipment. So with that little bit as an introduction, I'd like to turn the meeting over to Arnie and have him give us a little overview of the science branch.
Okay, I have a short presentation, so I'll go ahead and share screen. Can I do that even though you're sharing now? I guess.
No, I will have to unshare here.
Okay.
All right, and now you should be able to share.
Okay. On. Now, how do I get rid of this desktop one? Okay. So this would be short. Dave asked us to do sort of 5-minute presentations. So I just have a few things here, but I consider science is actually in 2 parts because I tend to do a lot of engineering stuff too. Now, why am I not able to change? Ah, isn't that interesting? Okay. All right. I do both engineering science as well as regular science. And so one of the things that we do here at New Hampshire is we use the BSM here as a test bed for anything that we want to add to the system. So if there's a software update, it comes out here first to make sure that it's okay before it gets propagated to the other sites. And the same thing is true with any kind of hardware. And so I wanted to tell you about the latest hardware changes up here in New Hampshire. The first is this dual filter wheel setup. And you can see from here, we have the standard 183 camera here, but it now has 2 filter wheels that are stacked. There's a male-to-male M42 adapter in between them in order to make the join. And then there's a small amount of spacing and it gets down into the Epsilon 180s corrector. And then this is the ZWO electronic focuser. And then down at this corner is the Pegasus 12-volt web switch that we used for powering everything on the telescope. The trees are kind of an odd angle because the park position is not horizontal. It's not that we live on a slope. But the two filter wheels actually stack very nicely. And when you do that, you end up with 14 available slots. You have to have one open slot in each of the wheels in order to pass light through. So that out of the 16, you get 14 available. And so what we've added to the system beyond the normal 7 BVI Sloan GRI is another Cousins R filter, one of Jerry Hubbell's engineered diffusers is in the system now, along with 2 neutral density filters and a diffraction grating. And you can use the diffuser, the neutral density filters on any of the filters in the normal filter wheel. So you have 7 filters up there, each of which can be in 4 different options, straight through, engineered diffuser, 2 neutral densities. So there's quite a bit of selection that's available. And then we also have a Sloan U prime and a Z short filter that's in one of the wheels too. So there's a lot of filters that can be used with the system. The dual wheel software support is a little bit missing right now. MaximDL has a plugin which supposedly will handle 2 wheels. However, it doesn't work very well with ASCOM drivers. And so it's hard, you can tell it with 2 native drivers that you're using an FLI wheel and you're using a QHY wheel or something. But if you use ASCOM, it doesn't know which one is which as far as the 2 wheels are concerned. So we haven't solved that problem yet. Diffraction Limited is looking into that issue. In the meantime, what we're doing is MaximDL allows you to put a filter wheel on the guider. And so we set up the guider without a camera, but with a filter wheel. And that way we can control both wheels. You just have to do it manually, which means right now, entire nights have to be set up one way or another. So you either are running normally, or you have a night with the diffuser, or you have a night with the neutral density filter. In the software end of things, Cliff will probably talk more about this. I just wanted to mention it. When you're dealing with bright stars, you end up with a lot of scintillation issues. You're taking a 1-second exposure, the scintillation is much larger than the photon noise. And so what we usually do is take a bunch of short exposures and then save them and transfer them to headquarters and let the researcher do the stacking. What Cliff has done is actually written a Python script which will do the stacking in between the image acquisition at the end of the night and before images get transferred to headquarters. So all short exposures get stacked, all long exposures are left alone. And what this does is cut down on the transfer time to headquarters and also to VPhoto, and also for the user doesn't have to do that process anymore. It's currently implemented on 3 of the BSMs. So what this means is that we can now do any brightness object up to and including Sirius. You're limited to a 1 and 1.5 degree field of view, which means comparison stars are going to be difficult with the bright stars, but we can image them. It's not impossible. The engineered diffuser spreads the image profile out over many more pixels than a straight through, carefully focused image, and that means then that you can get higher dynamic noise, dynamic range for your individual images taken with these systems. So you can actually get down into the millimag range with each individual exposure that you take. The larger filter set gives you a broader range of projects that you can do. And then, like I said, the stacking removes the scintillation. So I wanted to mention at the end here just sort of 4 projects. I saw Don was on there, so I made sure that BPER was in. Gary Pointer has been monitoring an outburst of AY lac. Brian Potter has been monitoring SSSIG for an HST campaign. Fred Walter is also doing an HST project now with our both the Bright Star monitors and the larger telescopes in the network. And Enrique has been looking at ASCAS, which is a double mode Cepheid that I discovered the double mode aspect of it many years ago. I won't tell you how many. And I want to show you the light curve of that. So here are 4 of these light curves. For BPER, I think almost all of this data in here is from one of the Bright Star monitors. This is from New Hampshire and this is from Texas. And it may be one of these others over here, probably this one over here is Hamrin. So there's multiple Bright Star monitors that have been observing this star for dawn. And note the brightness of the star. It's sort of like 4.5, 4.6 magnitude. Here is AY LAC. And at the time that we picked it up, it was 14th magnitude, and Gary was still taking data with the Bright Star monitors down to 17, 17 and a half.
Wow.
So that shows you the other extreme of what these BSM systems are capable of doing. This is about a 6-minute stack of exposure, and we can go longer than that if necessary for particular targets. So the photometry is reasonably good, even well below what you normally would expect with one of the Bright Star monitors. For SSSIG, all of the brown marks here were taken by Brian as part of the monitoring campaign. So you can see that the data quality is reasonably good and follows everybody else. And then finally, this is ASCAS. And I show it here because it's 3 different Bright Star monitors. Just showing you what kind of cadence you can get with these things. It actually is a pretty consistent every night monitoring, sometimes several observations per night. And so if you want to do this kind of monitoring, the Bright Star monitors do pretty well. And the reason that you don't see any kind of real variation, it just looks like scatter, is that this is a very short period star. And so you're not resolving the light curve at all. You have to phase these data points in order to see what the light curve looks like. And if you do that, it's really kind of neat because it's a double mode star, and so it doesn't look exactly like a typical Cepheid when you want to look at it. So I just wanted to end a little bit sort of the community stuff. If you haven't observed with Bright Star Monitor before, you can. There's a proposal forum link there to submit a request, and it's pretty easy. There is a forum. The AVSO net forum is there, and you can post questions and information there. Email Dave or myself. And also I wanted to put in a plug for the AVSO chat room. This is the current link. It will probably disappear once the new website comes up. But if you want to get into chat, this is one way of doing it. There's usually somewhere between 6 or 7 people that are on almost 24 hours a day, it seems like. So that's all I had here. So I will switch it back over.
Any questions for Arnie from our guests? Well, Arnie, in terms of the stacking, is that, did I hear you say that's going to be for exposures less than 10 seconds?
Yes, yep. Yes, that is correct. The main purpose of the stacking right now is to remove scintillation. And so when you're dealing with some of these bright stars and you're doing it with normal focus, you can end up with 20, 30, or 100 images for each filter. And this is very expensive in disk space and transfer time to transfer that number of images if you're doing, say, a time series or something. And so the main purpose was to decrease that by stacking all the short exposure ones. When you get to a longer exposure, 30 seconds or a minute or something, there's more decisions that have to be made as to whether or not those images are supposed to be stacked or you're trying to do a time series with that kind of cadence. And so we've made it the simplest way possible, in that we just take the short exposure ones and stack them.
Okay. Another question? Go ahead.
Yes.
I assume
Arnie,
your name isn't Vicky.
it says my name is Vicky, but I'm Don. This is Vicky's iPad. Well, anyhow, Arnie, about the diffusers and use of VPhoto. See, the diffusers, the diffused images I downloaded, I had to download because they wouldn't do photometry in Maxim because they hadn't been plate solved yet. And so then in order to work with Maxim, I had to bin an extra 2x2 with Maxim before Maxim could could latch onto the stars and find their medians and so forth. So will we have a way of stacking before images are moved up to VPhoto?
So you're talking about a way of binning before you move up.
In addition to stacking, but to binning. Some of these images with the diffuser got dispersed so wide, about 9-10 pixels, that the photometry program would not latch onto those stars and to their medians and without binning first.
Right. I hear what you're saying. That is certainly another step that would be easy to do. I mean, Cliff has the hooks in there now for doing stacking. And so if you added binning to that, you could, but it's another logistical flag that has to be carried through because you may want to bin, but somebody else may not. Mm-hmm. And so it's a possibility. There's also some other programs that are around, offline programs that you can use that you can bin the images before you transfer them up to VPhoto. So there's a couple alternatives. The main problem in my mind is that both binning, both the diffuser and defocusing end up with star images that most software have trouble with. The full width half max is not Gaussian. Mm-hmm. And so it's an issue that more people are going to be running into, especially if you want to try to do high precision work. And so we ought to think about how to best handle those situations. As long as you can plate solve the image, then VPhoto is fine after that. And so it may be a way in which we can do the plate solving on the local computer before it gets shipped up to VPhoto, and then you don't have to worry about it. You just use a big photometric aperture.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Any other questions for Arnie?
Well, I just have a specific question related to the Bright Star monitor here in New Mexico. You know, we've been having some issues, competition with uploading data with other observers out here. And I think the stacking thing would be a very good thing to have. Do you know if that software is here at the New Mexico site or when that will be here?
Cliff, do you want to answer that?
Sure. I put that on about a week ago. I had a few glitches early on, but it's been stacking, I want to say 3 nights now. And the benefit certainly depends on the images that were taken that night, but it can decrease the amount of data, the network bandwidth required by up to half on a night that has a lot of short exposures. The images end up being twice as big, but they compress quite well. Did that come through?
Yeah, that's helpful for me, and I can relay that to Dick Post, who sometimes is monitoring our uploads and is concerned we're uploading, taking too much of our bandwidth.
Okay, if you like, I can publish some statistics.
Yeah, that would help me.
Okay.
Arnie, I don't know if you have the chat window open, but there's a question there for you. You click on the chat button at the bottom.
Yeah, I
you
have
can
that.
see it.
I'm looking at the question right now. Yeah, so he has a question about bright star photometry in that the comp stars are much fainter than the target star. And the way you raise the comp star's signal and noise ratio is to stack. So if you need something more than 70, then, you know, stack 4 times as many images and you'll be well into the 100. The one thing that I want to caution is stacking in VPhoto. The problem with VPhoto in my mind is that it does everything as a 16-bit number. And so if you stack, you can eventually run out of dynamic range on the stacking. And so it's much better to stack in something like MuniWin, as you mentioned, or the Cliffs program as well in Python that comes out in floating point. And I think both of those will end up giving you the kind of signal and noise that you need. So just stack more. The main thing is if you have a signal noise of 3000 on the star, your target star, you're probably close to saturation. Usually once you get above about 400, you're getting pretty close to saturation if you have a well-focused star. So just be careful about the saturation and just stack lots of images as opposed to trying to do everything in a single exposure.
Anything else for Arnie?
Yeah, actually, I was just asked to come over here and maybe ask a question to him. First off, I want to say I've heard quite a bit about you. Ron Kachuk was my advisor at Ball State. So, but one of the things that I was wanting to ask is I've been using AAS a lot for using comparison stars for my eclipsing binaries, and I was wondering if there was any sort of plans to update perhaps maybe a DR11 for AAS.
Sure, there always is. DR11 has been in the works for about 2 years, and it's one of these things where I've just been overcommitted and haven't had time to go back and do the stuff that I really ought to do. When I get overcommitted, I tend to have tunnel vision, and I tend to work on one thing, and whether or not it's the most important thing, that's what I work on. And I know that AAS DR11 needs to get done, and there are about 100 additional nights that need to be added to AAS, and far better processing is possible. And hopefully that will come out this winter sometime. I just can't tell you exactly when.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to step back over to the eclipsing binary panel though, but thank you.
Yeah, I have a question about what exposure time do you need for a 5th magnitude and maybe a 7th magnitude comparison star?
So for a 5th magnitude star, I think we're shooting about 1 second exposure, something like that. Depends on, you know, is it a blue star or is it a red star as to how it comes out.
Red star.
So it's a red star. So you can probably go a few seconds, which means you're going to be into scintillation with that. So what you end up doing normally is take like a 2 second exposure and then take 10 of them and then let the system stack. And as far as a 7th magnitude star, that is about a 10 or 15 second exposure at the V filter.
Okay, thank you.
And hi, Wayne, been a long time.
Yeah, it's been a while.
All right, anything else for Arnie? Very good. Let's move on to the technical branch and Ken Menzies. You need to unmute. There you got it.
Unmute myself, and hopefully I'm sharing my screen, and I'm going to move this over and expand it. And can you see that okay, Dave?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to use Arnie's last slide as a segue into something that's quite a bit different. I'm hoping to entice the number of people on the site today who are potentially new to AAVSONet and who are interested potentially in using it for some research. And I'm going to start out with a couple of basic things. I think you can see the website right now. And the basic place to start is just by typing in AAVSONet in the search bar and clicking enter. And the first link is going to get you to our AAVSONet page. Once we transfer over to the new web page, it'll be slightly different, but not a lot. And I wanted to do a couple things. Dave asked me to talk in a few brief words about BSM Hamrin. You'll see on the map of the Earth this little blue balloon out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean in Hawaii. BSM Hamrin hasn't been there for quite a long time. It's currently sitting on Gary Walker's back deck. It was historically a small refractor on a CGM mount with a ST camera. It's now on a Paramount, courtesy of Zekmon, with an E180 telescope, Takashi, and with an ASI 183 CMOS camera. And Gary's in the process of taking it apart so it can be shipped to another location in Hawaii that Arnie's arranging for it. Next step I wanted to do was to indicate, first of all, for all of you, I suspect you know that AAVSO is not iTelescope and it's not SLU. The people who you see on this webcast today are the people who volunteer their time to operate the system. And many of the people, other than Bill Stein, who you do see here, are the operators at each of the telescopes who've been kind enough to put one of these systems in their backyards and operate it on a regular basis for the system. All of us are obviously volunteers, not paid. We don't have a paid staff like iTelescope does, and we don't have an income stream that comes with that system. So I think all of you should expect that we'll do our best, and we hope sincerely that we get more people involved in learning and doing research with the AAVSONet system. And I'd just like to click a couple of links on this page, which I hope you can see, as in how to write an AAVSO proposal. In fact, there's some description here. And in fact, there is a way to click to the proposal form, which I'm trying to get to. Let's see. There we are at the bottom of that page. To the simple proposal form that exists. Again, there are a variety of reasons for using the system. Historically, it's been a rather rigorous review process. The hope is that each of you who use the system would have a relatively well-defined scientific rationale for what you wanted to study. Frankly, over the years, we've loosened up that protocol. We're trying to entice more people into using it for their own research, or even for a situation where they'd like to learn how to do photometry and they don't happen to have their own telescope. Obviously, we're not in a position to let you use this as your personal telescope and use it all the time, but to get a basic understanding of how to do the process and perhaps entice you into getting your own telescope, we have a proposal system that now is a relatively wide open approval process. Still goes through a telescope allocation committee, but the criteria for selection are expanded quite extensively. So you just need to identify in a few sparse words what you'd like to do. In some cases, people are offering to follow one of the campaigns that exists on the AAVSO website. So they will identify that campaign. they'll reiterate what its requirements are in terms of magnitudes, exposures, and the like, what filters they'd like to use, and fill in just in a text format. You can just type in XYZ or whatever you want and tell us what you'd like to do. And fill in a target name, obviously, like SS SIG, for example, which has a campaign right now. Fill in right ascension and declination, though interestingly enough, George Silvas has set this up so that when I write a plan for this, that's then uploaded to the individual telescopes, it can actually determine what the right ascension and declination are for individual targets. It's nice to have a magnitude range. It's nice for you to provide that information so we don't have to look it up, frankly. And also tell us whether you'd like this to be proprietary information. However, keep in mind again that we want this to be used by the general membership and would hope that the information is not proprietary and that is released almost immediately to other users through the database, the AID database of new data, so that everybody can see it and make use of it. So that's really all that you need to do. There are a couple of additions we're going to be adding to this once we have it on the new website, where we'll ask for a specific CSV file, effectively an Excel spreadsheet format, that'll allow you to provide us a little more detail. Again, so for example, George or I doesn't have to look all the information up. It's already there in a tabular form that can be imported directly into the plan ASA SVN program, which we use to create the plan for ACP. So that's the first primary step that you need to take personal involvement in to get it on board. The next place that you actually can't look, but I can look because I have full permissions to see them, are the actual proposal pages or requests that exist for the system. And you can see over the years, we're up to 162 proposals now. And we've been trying to foster more interest in generating your individual proposals. And for example, Chris Colvin has one that was just accepted very recently, and I can view it. And you can always view your own proposals on this page. You just can't view everybody else's, but I can. For example, as we said, this is from the proposal page, the proposal form that I described a few minutes ago. We've got the target name, happens to, in this case, give right ascension and declination in digital format, in decimal format, excuse me, decimal degrees and decimal hours. Actually, we use sexagesimal right ascension in hours, minutes, and seconds, for example. And also a magnitude range. In this case, it's a very small magnitude range. And then I can also define what telescope that goes to. And depending on the magnitude range, if we have a very bright star, I would certainly pick one of the BSMs. And now with the new E180 telescopes, we have a much wider range, and the CMOS cameras that can go very short exposure. We have a much broader, wider range of magnitudes that we can cover this with this one telescope. Historically, and still at BSM South and BSM Berry, which are in Australia, they currently, for a very short period of time more, have roughly the 3-inch refractors that we've had historically. But they're going to be changing over very soon. They have the hardware now to the E180 7-inch telescopes. And you'll see there are some, a written proposal. This is effectively what you will write as a proposer. I'm writing to propose that I receive some telescope time from BSM New Mexico. For proprietary star, there isn't a known variable of any type. I have data from my school's telescope. So this is an educator who wants to get more information so he can have his students study the star. That's an excellent reason in our mind now for proposing something. There are also some comments here. We chat back and forth about something that may be acceptable, that's something that needs to be corrected. And then when I'll go back to one of the other ones here, one of the ones that already been allocated. Let's see, I'm gonna pick, in fact, Don Collins wanted his B per analysis to occur. And we assigned that to a variety of telescopes. And we've asked Don to allow us to change some of the focus on the telescopes, as Arnie was talking about, so that we can get better photometry. So I think I'd like to stop there and answer any questions. Just again, our operational methodology now is to accept a broader range of proposals: educational, personal information and growth, research. Those are the three basic ones. And we're willing to give you a chance to use the scope for some modest period of time and some modest number of images per night. Some of them include time series, so don't give up on a time series. Obviously, if we had every telescope working on a full night time series for a star, it wouldn't give anybody else a chance to do it as well. So we do limit those to some extent. So again, I will stop here and answer any questions you may have once I unshare.
Just by way of comment, while other people are thinking, Ken, we were going to discuss later in our meeting, but we are working on a learning photometry module, so that if somebody just wants to get some practice doing some data reduction on a star using VPhoto or what have you, we're looking at either offering a single night of a very short period variable, or maybe periodic observations over a month or so of a longer period variable, so that you would be able to get at least one or perhaps 2 or 3 cycles of a light curve, just so that you'd have a chance to see what happens and get your feet wet, get a toe in the water.
Yes.
That should be rolling out fairly soon, and details to follow on that.
Right. So we hope potentially to create some test subjects, if you will, test targets, where we would generate some plans for those and make the data from that time series available to effectively the general membership, so they could practice their photometry.
Any questions for Ken? All right, thanks, Ken. Next, we wanted to go to our software branch, and George. Otherwise known as AAVSO3.
Oh, am I on?
You're on.
Okay. But what I wanted to describe a little bit, how much time is available on the BSM network? So let me share my screen. And I was doing a bit of an analysis today.
Evidently, the sentence of the year is "I'm sharing my screen."
Yes, it is. So here's some stats for the BSM scopes. I didn't include the 24-inch scopes like SRO and OC61. Those are for more specialized projects, but they are available too. But in terms of from June 1 to 11/15, yes, 2 days ago, or today actually, that's 168 calendar days. And here are how many days these various scopes observed. We have actually 306 observing nights in that 168 days. And some of them have great weather, like BSM New Mexico. Some of these numbers are a little bit low because they weren't in full operation back in June. They're wrapping up. It would look different if I did a shorter period. And here's the kind of amount of time, of total observing time these scopes have. This is in minutes, and here it's converted to hours. So we have 2,171 hours of observing. This is on targets. But the question is, how much time is really available? Because we keep the scopes running flat out. So when it doesn't have a plan, a submitted plan to work, there's always a background plan running at a lower priority. So the scope is never idle. So in terms of the total amount of survey time, is running about 42%. That's 908 hours of survey time, which is available. This is the number which would be available for more plans to be put into the system. So we have room for people to come and play. Any questions about these numbers, or what? I'm just starting to develop some stats and a dashboard so we can monitor these things. If you have other ideas on what's a pertinent statistic to show, I'm happy to work in that direction. Any questions or any thoughts? I'll leave that up on the screen for a moment until the next guy jumps in.
George, it might be useful to capture the amount of time that the weather stations are saying it's unsafe and the hours that are not available per site.
Yeah, no, that's I mean, the scope doesn't observe for a couple different reasons. Weather is blocking it, or it's down for repair, or those are the main categories. It'd be nice to be able to capture those numbers. Not available yet, but we're improving the data flow from the DSMs. We're now getting the full logs downloaded to headquarters, and I'd love to reach out into whatever weather system is there and get its information. Every scope has a different weather box on it, so a little bit of sorting out to do, but that's kind of stuff that I work on and that Cliff Kotnick works on. So we're the two programmers pushing stats, pushing pipeline modifications and things like that. But yeah, downtime is good.
I have a question, George. You know, if you're collecting data, and you know, we do have the review of the images too. What percentage of the images collected are usable? You know, because some have cloud cover and things like that. So that might be another interesting statistic.
Absolutely, because so every time, every image that gets processed and sent to headquarters, somebody eyeballs it. Each scope has its own reviewer, and they tick through and say, no, how many, this is out of focus, people. No, they tag them that way. So that is data we can reach into, and that's worth trying to report. Thank you.
Anybody else have questions for George? It was certainly very interesting statistics, and I think this is something we need to keep track of long term.
Mm-hmm.
And help us
Main
see where
takeaway is that we've got time to
never get it right, but we're always want to get it better.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, let's move on to the engineering branch and Gary.
Okay, I'd like to share my screen.
Told you that was the sentence of the year.
Okay, I'm going to talk about what happens after Bright Star Monitor. You saw several references to Hamrin. And for those who may not have seen it, I'm going to attempt to run a movie here, which we made this morning. And
I don't think you have screen share yet.
Oh.
When is it? When is it? 3:30?
Is that coming through?
No, not yet.
You've signed out, George?
I have released the screen.
Well, I'm on my screen in PowerPoint. Yes.
It never fails.
Yeah, I think you have to get out of PowerPoint, at least out of full screen slideshow version, and then down at the bottom of the Zoom.
Screen. You should see share screen.
So I have to be in slide sorter or in presentation mode?
You can't be in either.
Zoom screen. Get out of PowerPoint.
So minimize PowerPoint.
Okay. I know what you're saying now.
Green box at the bottom of the share screen. Yeah.
There you go.
All right, here we go. Are you seeing that?
Yep.
Okay, that's BSM Hamrin. And that's a Epsilon 180, and it's a Paramount provided by Tecmon. And we've had it running for quite some
Gary,
time.
I don't see anything. I see you're just at the slideshow or PowerPoint screen. I don't see the movie.
You might want to close it. You're sharing just one window. You need to back off and share your desktop. Then it'll follow you around whatever you're looking at.
Okay. Walk me through it again. I have my PowerPoint slide. I can look at it. What do I have to do?
You need to go into slideshow mode.
Slideshow. Okay. Slide sorter. No.
No, up at the top.
Slideshow up at the top.
Okay.
To the right. Look for the slideshow
Pull down menu at the top.
pull down menu at the top.
Slideshow.
There you
Okay.
go. Now view show.
View show. Okay.
All right. Now go down to that slide and start the movie.
Okay, it's going to go to the next slide, I think, but let's see. Yeah, no, that doesn't work. I tried that this morning. Okay, let's forget about the movie, okay? So what happens after Bright Star Monitor? This is supplemental to what George said. I took a look at how many items, how many different projects were observed by Hamrin. We had about 15,000 observations, roughly 1,500 items from August 1st until last night or this morning. And so I think the thing is pretty well debugged. That being said, the Max Dome board failed to connect today about 11 o'clock after it worked this morning. So we have one more little bug to work out. So anyway, Hamrin is going to get packed up and shipped off to Hawaii shortly. And what happens after that? Have an idea that what would support Bright Star Monitor would be something called Bright Spectral Robot. Basically, it's a BSM, but it does Spectra instead. And so I'm going to be developing that locally with the goal that it be a remote operation eventually. It'll be put on my back porch here where Hamrin was. And I have some equipment on order. I have a CDK-14 and a PlaneWave L350 mount. I have an on-axis guider, some precise parts adapters. I've ordered a UVEX spectrograph from Shellyak. That's the commercial version of the 3D printed spectrograph. It seems to be the best one for this application. And have a ZWO-294 CMOS camera. I also have a telescope it was kind of my first telescope. It was an Epsilon 130, and it's been sitting on the shelf here. I decided to put it to use. The L350 or the PlaneWave mounts, it's a single arm fork, and so it allows you to put one instrument on one side and one instrument on the other. So the plan is to put the Epsilon 130 with an STC 428p SBIG CMOS camera in order to do simultaneous photometry and spectroscopy. Designed up a 4x4 by 5 foot roll-up enclosure, very much like Hamrin, but about 10% bigger. I have a picture of that, which I can show you. It'll hold all the equipment in alt-azimuth mode, so you can get a 14-inch in spectroscopy operating that way. There's no impact to AAVSOnet dollar-wise, but I will be looking for help collaborating and leveraging the AAVSOnet infrastructure pipeline and so forth, and make it compatible with the AAVSO spectral database. And the goal is to provide remote spectra for members, just like BSM does for photometry. When it becomes operational, which my guess is maybe a year from now, we'll be looking at the beginnings of the kind of stats that you saw on photometry. we'll consider moving it to a dark site, which we haven't decided where that will be yet. And there is a picture of the bright spectral robot in my garage being assembled. It's still got maybe a week's work in order to button it up and connect it. And then it'll move onto the deck. So, questions?
Gary, do you have a pet star that you want to use for your test run?
I do not. There's a lot of work being done with BE stars, spectral wise, and that might be a possibility. One of the first ones I'll be shooting is, of course, some calibration stars to calibrate the instrument. And I have to honestly say I've never taken a Spectra except with a star analyzer. So I'm expecting to go through a lot of learning myself on how to spell Spectra.
Can I say something? Hi, guys.
Yes.
Of course.
I like the direction that I'm hearing, and I love the idea of having simultaneous spectra and photometry from the same site. I'm just circulating around observing sections, and it was just the PEP section where they were talking about really bright targets. And what I was telling them is that they need to coordinate with individuals who have spectrographs in their hands, because these are data that you can these are stars that you can observe with small telescopes, but really high resolution, any resolution if you want. But Gary, for your purposes, we have, as part of the spectral validation process, the first step, a set of recommended standard stars that have already known spectra. So if you want to compare yours with, to understand more or less your wavelength, calibration procedure, or anything like that, one of two things can happen. You can take a spectrum of one of those stars and submit it to the database to begin with, and we will give you a feedback. Or you can just send us an email and we can send you the spectrum, or at least let you know where the list is from. These are really high resolution spectra. We're talking about 200,000 resolution, but we are scaling them down to the resolution that you take. So we can definitely help like that for you to diagnose your system and understand your software. But I'm really, you guys are doing a great job. I really love the way that the observing section, the direction of the observing section, this observing section is taking. And I heard that there are plans to incorporate BSM observations with some of our choice courses. What I think that is the first step for a standalone choice course around the BSM telescopes. But thank you so much for all your work. I do realize this is a volunteer effort, and I really value it. I threw a whole bunch of stuff at you. You know where to find me if you have any questions, of course. And you know where to find Dave. Does this make sense? I just see people staring at me, and I'm not really good at this, the whole screen thing. So, and I'm Greek, so I'm used to people interacting with me. So, hey, give me something.
Happy birthday to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Stella. I should have mentioned that obviously, if I'm going to intend that this be used to observe spectra for members like Bright Star Monitor, that we would be certifying it with the standard stars that are already available, and probably several of them, maybe even a dozen, I don't know.
Yeah, of course. But all I'm saying is that if you need a set of stars to get you started and provide some kind of a calibration process for you, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have a set already.
Yeah, I'd like to say that it seems like almost all of this has been done in bits and pieces, various places. And the only thing I'm doing is sort of grabbing what I think will be the best practices in order to provide bright spectra to the AAVSO and amateur community. And I think we're going to find, as we get into this, you could ask yourself the question, well, what science are you going to do now? There is some, but as we get the capability, we'll find out there's a lot of things we can do that we didn't even think of, you know, before starting the project. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. I didn't mean to interrupt the conversation. I just wanted to provide some insight.
Well, Gary, if we fast forward it to about a year in the future and your project is operational, what do you see this members submitting proposals for this, or is this something for your projects, or how do you see that part of this evolving?
well, one of the things I've found is that if you have sort of your own robotic telescope, you sort of drown in data. And so I have a photometric robotic telescope, and I can only use about, you know, a third of the data there myself, and I share it with 2 other people. And I think that the same thing's going to happen true of the spectral robot, is that, you know, we'll get to a point where we do accept proposals, and we'll be begging Ken to modify his proposal form to include Spectra.
Yeah, that was one thought I had, is if we're going to do that, then the proposal form has to change. But my perspective on most projects is always to think small, and we ought to, you know, turn down the spigot as tight as we can and just let a little bit through at first until we see how much interest there is in this, and, you know, get out whatever glitches we find until we start letting, before you start opening it up to too much use. And, you know, if we could also model all this learning photometry, is have a little, you know, just add water thing for somebody who just wants to get learning spectroscopy, and just get a small amount of information that we would put together for them. So those are all things to think about.
I mean, another great thing would be if in 2 or 3 or 4 months we have an operational system, and all of a sudden there's a campaign on something bright that needs lots of spectra, and we can just turn this thing on and learn things that we hadn't even thought of. But, you know, who knows what's going to happen.
Well, absolutely, absolutely. That's an exciting project. Anybody else have questions for Gary and his Bright Spectra robot? All right. If I could ask Arnie, Gary, and George, if you would send me copies of your slides so that I can incorporate those into the minutes. And what I'd like to do at this point is to kind of go back to our planned agenda. I know we've got a lot of guests. You are welcome to stay and listen in on the rest of our business meeting. Or if anybody else wants to go to one of the other breakout sessions, please feel free. And if you have any questions before you want to bounce around, we'd be glad to take those general questions. We'd be glad to take those now as well. Brad?
I have a general question. So this is my first experience with BSM Monitor anywhere, other than watching the recording of the webinar from a few weeks ago. And I'm curious to know, I know that when there's a proposal and there are specific targets that have been observed, that data goes either to the vPhoto file of the observer or to an FTP site. What happens to the data from all of the program stars that happen in the background? I presume they're calibrated, you know, reduced, and then what happens? Are they then measured and reported, or are they, do we have a box full of data that someone can work on?
Well, that's probably a question for Arnie, and I know there's talk in general through the AVSO and a new section developing on data mining. That's certainly, those could dovetail together. Arnie, do you want to comment?
Yeah. Hi, Brad. The background survey targets are automatically measured, and all the data extracted from those images and stored in text files initially off the telescope. And then sometime on a very erratic basis, I go through and I actually do differential photometry for all the objects and all the frames. And that goes into the Epic Photometry database. And so if you go to the AVSONet webpage, I think there is a link in there for the Epic Photometry database. And that contains all the stars that have been extracted from the individual frames and already calibrated and put onto the standard system. So yeah, I do have software which goes through and analyzes every frame that's taken. And that data is stored internally. It could be, you know, the raw data could be released to the community, but I think that's probably not as useful as it is when it's already been calibrated. But the real trouble is that I don't do it often enough. And so the original thought was once a year I'd go through and extract the data from the prior year and put it into the database, but that hasn't been done.
Okay, thank you. So the nature of my question was that with the additional emphasis on education and I think some marketing efforts to bring in potential new members, they might be undergraduate students, they might be graduate students, they might be high school teachers with classes behind them, whether there was, or whether a need would develop over time to just take a few relatively, what I call fast movers, you know, HADS stars or RR Lyra stars or something, and not report them, but use that as a database of raw images and bias flat and dark frames so that somebody can download that raw data and learn how to calibrate images and go through it. And like a 6-week astronomy class for a high school physics teacher could basically get photometry in a box. And I know that that's probably the first test drive of that will be providing data for the CCD photometry 1 and 2 classes. But, you know, my question really is aimed long-term, whether there's an opportunity to use VSM in a much more tightly linked way with the education efforts that are kind of underway.
Sounds reasonable to me. It's just a matter of effort on our end in order to put appropriate files into some location that people then can download and work with. Because all the data that you're talking about exists. It's just a question of making it available to the outside community. You're talking about images per se. I was talking about fully reduced photometry. 2 different aspects, same kind of end result of giving something to the educators.
Well, I think from a broader perspective, it raises the question of cross-pollination between our section and some of the other observing sections. And, you know, this idea of data mining, I think we heard yesterday at the meeting, a student from Russia who had used some databases and had identified 20 new variable stars. So, you know, there's information there that other young investigators could certainly use, and we need to think about that very, very much as we go forward. And we don't want to silo where we're doing our thing and the other observing sections are doing their thing, and we don't talk to each other. So it's a great thought, Brad. Any other questions before we start into the rest of the agenda? All right, well, this is rather mundane, but I sent revised copies of the minutes to everybody. Is there any other additions or corrections before we approve the minutes from last month's, the October 27th meeting? 3, 2, 1, hearing none, minutes are approved as distributed. Arnie exchanged a couple of emails with me about this learning photometry concept and talked about a short list of some possible stars to use for somebody that just wants to get a toe in the water and some experience with this. I don't know if Arnie, you want to say anything else about that? And I had a couple of thoughts as well.
Not really. Basically, I came up with a short list of short period pulsators, something on the few hour time range, such as the high amplitude delta Scuti stars, and then something in the sort of the 15-day range, so that if you observe it for a month, you get a couple cycles of the light curve. And again, pulsating variables is what I chose that particular time. The main reason is that they're doing something all the time, whereas if you pick an eclipsing variable, you really do have to catch it at the right phases, and that's a lot more difficult to program. And so I just wanted something where you could just set it up for once a night, and if you get a data point, that's great. Or if you set up for a time series on any night, you'll get enough data to be able to see something going on. And so I gave that data to Dave, and we can expand that as needed. But I thought it was a good starting point for kind of projects that people could do, see some results, submit the data, and it would actually be scientifically valuable because of things like looking for O-C changes in period and what have you on those particular stars.
Practical question that I had on that was, if we do a time series versus a just a few images each clear night, isn't the time series going to tie up more telescope time? And would it be less impact on the system if we just did, you know, 2 or 3 images each clear night? And maybe George or Ken might want to comment on that.
Well, I think
if you want to make it educationally interesting to people, I wholeheartedly believe you need it to be short period variables and ones that you can get quickly and in a relatively short period of time, like a night. You'd probably want to do it more than once, obviously. I think, you know, just trying to get a more longer period variable with occasional images per night or every 3 days or something is not going to end up with a light curve that anybody's going to be able to make use of, I don't think, from an educational point of view. My personal opinion.
George, what are your thoughts? You're muted, George.
Probably best, and don't have a lot to comment. It's what we want to do is see that the useful images are taken. My part of this big machine is just making sure the data flows. And so in terms of the selection of targets and everything, that's a higher level. And I let Ken and Arnie dictate that.
So the point that Ken made was that if we do just a very short period variable of a time series of one night, you're going to get the instant gratification. You're going to have all the data there at one time. That might be more popular. Is that the consensus of the group of where we should go?
Yeah, I have sometimes mentoring high school students, and that would be the most interesting. You know, catch their attention, one pile of data, and work through it.
Yeah, I only put in the longer period ones because there are some people who are coming in from the long period variable direction, visual observing. And so they're more used to getting one image a night or something like that, one observation per night. And so they may be more interested in that kind of an object. So it's just kind of, you know, touching both bases.
And from the standpoint of using VPhoto, it's a whole lot easier to put all the observations and have it do one time series, and it gives you the plot and the error bars and everything all together. It's not transformed, but if it's, you know, as an educational purpose, that, you know, you get the plot without even having to go to some other V-star or what have you to, or light curve generator to put the plot together. Well, from what I'm hearing, I suggest we pursue just the short period, the high amplitude delta Scuti group, and have a menu that should hit fairly close to the time of when the proposal comes through. And for our next meeting, I'll put a little text together and send it to Arnie, and we'll bounce it around and get it back for approval at our next meeting. Unless there's any other discussion on that, we'll move on. Okay. Next item on my agenda was the webinar. As an organization, there was an excellent webinar series that got lots and lots of interest from all over the world. I think we had 300 and some people participate in our webinar. And they're putting together the webinar series for next year. Talked about this a little bit at last month's meeting, and the suggestion was to kind of do a tag team similar to what we did today, but perhaps flesh it out a little longer. I think the webinars for next year are planned for 1 hour rather than the 2 hours that were this year. So that's going to be the one change. So maybe about a 10-minute presentation from several people from our group. They sent us a proposed date of the 24th of July, 2021. That's quite a ways in the future, but they're trying to put the calendar together. Does anybody have any big conflicts that they're going to be away or anything that they can't participate that they know of at this point? All right, well, I'm going to tell them tentatively that we will support them on the 21st of July next year, next summer. And hopefully it will be a better world by then, a little safer.
Did you say the 21st or the 24th? Dave?
24 July 2021.
Okay, so that's a Saturday, just for everyone's information.
Right.
Excellent.
In terms of BSM Texas, there had been some connectivity problems. It was not at our end, it was with the internet service provider, and they claim that they've got those issues fixed. So hopefully between that and the stacking program that Cliff put together, we won't have any more problems there.
Dave, I actually checked that a couple nights ago, and the throughput was around 15 megabits per second. So it's up and down. So that's very good.
And it's a pretty remote place. So I'm not surprised. I guess there's a microwave transmission as part of the sending of the signal. So, all right. And going down to science branch reports, Arnie, do you have anything else to add other than your presentation?
No, not right now. The only thing I was thinking of, and Brad already took off, was that we still do have a few objects that are in what I call the legacy list that are being monitored that may or may not have a person who's available to analyze them. Dennis has been doing a couple of these stars, and there may be some others that are around, and if I find them, I'll go ahead and announce them on the forum. So basically just people adopt it and they get to reduce the data from there on in.
Okay.
There is one logistic issue related to science and relates to New Hampshire using alternate nights for diffuser versus not diffuser. Chuck Cinnamon has his V919 Cepheus star where he has specific times intervals where he needs to get the eclipse. And my suspicion is that's getting messed up with the switch to diffuser on those nights. So if there's some way that we could work together to try to avoid that happening on the nights he needs his images, he's literally only got one night out of 12 attempts already because of weather, or not just on New Hampshire, I'm talking about New Mexico too. So it's it's a little bit of an issue, and I think we need to resolve it somehow. I know you.
All right. I thought that he had several nights on New Hampshire. In fact, last night he has data from New Hampshire.
Okay, I will get back to him and find out if he's not looking at the right place. I think at this point he is. Whether it's just delays in processing or whatever.
Okay.
He
And then
told me
the,
in that email he only had one night so far.
okay. I know that 2 nights were used for the diffuser. Both of those were for B per. And so there's 2 people that are conflicting who need the telescope for time series.
Yep. To a certain extent, a good thing, I guess we would admit, but not always.
In terms of helping me out with the board, has anyone gotten any feedback from our users that sort of short quotes that I could use? Had a great experience. This really helped, or helped my college course or whatever. Might need to look into soliciting some if we haven't. But certainly anything you hear, good or bad or otherwise, try to forward it on to me, and maybe I can put some of those together in a word cloud or something for board reports. Ken, other than your presentation, do you have anything else to report for today's meeting?
No, I think we've covered most of the things I was going to talk about.
Okay. George?
Just in terms of operations, been working on SRO. SRO had fallen behind as we were changing how the data was flowing. That is, taking it out of the mirror on the WUMA facility. So, but that's coming. I'm almost up to date. I have a couple more tweaks, and then we'll have I'll be able to get SRO on a regular schedule. There was some work being done on New Mexico also. I need to check on. We're playing around with the pipeline so that it actually activates as soon as a shutdown is requested by ACP, rather than waiting to some clock time, 10 in the morning or something like that, to start the transfer. And experimenting with different ways of doing it and avoiding our sync stepping on itself. So once that's stabilized, we'll get that distributed around to the other systems.
Now, you had talked about some defocusing code. Where does that stand?
I was helping Arnie. We're trying to sort out how Focus Max handles defocus, and I have a conversation going with Steve Brady of Focus Max, trying to sort out if there's any issues there. Arnie, where do you think it stands at this point for Texas?
That's a good question. I don't think it's been resolved as to how defocus and Focus Max are working together. And so we may need to take a few hours one night and just play around with it and see if we can make sure that it's working the way that we hope it should work.
Okay. So I'll continue. I'll pick up the conversation with Steve and see if I can get some more details, because it seemed like we were only getting an effect with an focus offset of 30 or 45. And that doesn't match with the parameters I see that he discusses in the setting. So I really need to talk with him. The other thing I'm pursuing is on NH2, the dual filter wheel. I have a conversation going with Maxim and Colin at the Diffraction Limited, and I'll pick that up this week. What we're trying to do is persuade them. We're trying to persuade them to modify the Maxim software and expose more setup capability.
Okay. Is this focus offset and the diffuser two competing solutions for the same problem, or are we eventually going to end up just going one direction
I
or
think
the
we'll
other?
probably end up with the engineered diffuser just because it gives better images. The problem with defocus, if you defocus very much, you start getting donuts as opposed to nice star images. And so it's kind of a critical factor as to how much you can defocus and still have decent images that software can analyze. Whereas the engineered diffuser is a much more symmetrical, nice shaped image that is much easier to analyze. And so I think I'd prefer to go that route. And if you do go that route, then you basically have to go to a stacked filter wheel arrangement. And while we can do it with the E180s, we just have to see whether you can do it with BSM Texas, for example. So it may not be something that you can distribute around to every BSM site at this point.
It's a function of having enough back focus.
Yeah, primarily back focus. You also have to check and see how the optical path is so that you don't get any vignetting in the system with the second filter wheel.
Mm-hmm.
We could also stick with the 8-position wheel and sacrifice the least valuable filter.
But that doesn't help you because you can't stack the diffuser on top of V or
Right.
R or something like that.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Yeah, that was a dumb comment. Sorry about that.
Dave, I had one more question comment. We have one of the other reviewers on the forum today, Dennis High. You've been sitting here the whole day. Are things proceeding well with most of your reviewing of Texas? Have you gone completely out of your mind with boredom yet, or is it reasonably good?
No, it's pretty good. I just have to check every once in a while to make sure that I don't miss a day.
Welcome to the club.
Yeah, it's getting to be over 1,000 images a night.
There's been 2,000 a couple times, 2,600 I think one night.
Wow.
Yeah, that sounds like BW Vol, doesn't it, Dave?
That's what it was.
One thing that would help me, and it's probably in Cliff's ballpark, and that is that I mentioned this once before a long time ago, is that the thumbnails that the image reviewers see are the full frame thumbnails. And if you want to check for defocus and trailing and things like that, it'd be awfully nice to have a magnified version of that thumbnail. You know, 100 by 100 subframe out of the middle of the image or something like that, that is blown up so that people can actually see individual pixels.
Would you do that additionally, Arnie, or in place of?
I would say additionally, because if you want to look for clouds or something, it's really nice to have the full frame.
Definitely needs to be both. I guess one of my observations over the last month or so, or a little more, is that most of the systems at certainly New Hampshire, because you're running it, obviously, it's in your backyard, are really stable. In fact, frankly, I'm embarrassed to say I scroll through the images much faster now. And I know Dennis still looks for satellites. I've given up worrying about those. It's nothing we can do anything about anyway. And the end user needs to worry about that if it goes right through the middle of his target. So I just wanted to make sure you're aware of that. You probably have figured it out by my short normal night comments with my reviews.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add to that is that I always like to have a collection of images that have unusual artifacts. And so, for instance, on M67, that was taken, I guess, I don't know, probably from New Hampshire fairly recently. There was a satellite that went right through the middle of the cluster. And that's the kind of thing that I like to download and have available for various presentations. So even over and above just keeping the engineering data coming through, it's nice to see these oddball things because I collect them.
I'll try to keep that in mind.
Question. How many people use the HTML report that is generated for each run? Do the reviewers use it at all, or I know Remarkomatic has its own flow or its own way to look at the thumbnails. But is anybody looking at the HTML report?
Frankly, George, from my point of view, I did for the first couple of times. It's so much extra information that I'm personally not interested in terms of reviewing. At least that's my observation, that I quickly open and close them just to get them non-highlighted from blue to gray on the page. That's just my honest observation.
Sure.
I actually use them all the time because there's a lot of engineering data there that's not captured any other way, such as whether or not the CCD is cooling down the CMOS, the camera, let's call it, is cooling down properly at the beginning of the night. And quite often I'm looking for a specific object, a specific target, and it's just easier to scroll down the list of targets in the report and click on that and be able to see the images rather than having to know that it's images 305 through 307.
My one observation about that is I suspect you're a unique animal, Arnie, and I don't think any of the other operators do that.
Arnie, you were talking about oddball things. I can't remember who told me this, and maybe it's a urban legend, but they claimed they had an image of a lightning bug.
I've had, helicopters, you can tell them because they get their rotating light. Because at U.S. Naval Observatory, we were sort of on the flight path for the local National Guard. We had a earthquake while data was being taken. And so the star just moves all over the place. Lots of satellites, cosmic rays were, because the chip was bowed, the cosmic ray came in one side and went out the other, but didn't have a continuous streak through it. So there's lots of interesting things that you collect when you start talking about millions of images, and that's what AVSONet is doing these days.
Cool. Before we leave the subject of software, I guess the other thing in terms of Texas is a roof position. And
yes.
You want to comment on that, George?
Yeah, there's enough information that I know how to try to set up a safety warning based on the output of their weather device. So I'm looking through the manual there, and we'll address some questions on how to reach out and talk to that. If it's a new instrument, in fact, it might be an alpaca device, which we can reach out and talk to. But it's on the list. No, you don't think so?
Well, the ultimate software for whether or not the roof opens or not is Preston's brain. So he makes the final call himself for each night because he's responsible for every instrument in there. And that's certainly fair, but he obviously is very willing to work with us as well.
Okay, it's a little subtle in that the information is available from that device, the state of the roof, and that's what we want.
Right.
We don't really care about the weather.
We don't care about the decision-making process. We
just is the roof open or not, and then I can treat that as a weather safety signal. If it's closed, and then we can button up. So there's got to be a way to do that. There's enough pieces there.
Yeah, the trouble with it, with the roof closed and taking images is that they go through the standard pipeline and then they get shipped up to VFOT and they're not plate solved and it's kind of a mess. So that's why we prefer to find a way to prevent images being taken when the roof is closed.
Yeah, and I try to visually verify that the roof is open before we start the run, but I'm not going to stay awake all night looking to see if the roof closes. So,
okay.
All right, we'll move on to Gary. Anything else from your report in terms of engineering?
Nope, I think I covered everything, unless there are any questions.
Yes, Ray. You have a question? We can't hear you. No sound. Okay. Sorry. Dick was not able to make the meeting today, and he told me he really didn't have anything else to report. Any other business for today's meeting?
Dave, perhaps Ray could write his question in the chat and we could see if we can answer it.
Great idea. Spoken like a true engineer. You know the difference between a mathematician and an engineer? Mathematician wants it right, an engineer wants it to work.
He should be unmuted now.
He's typing.
May not have a microphone.
We do actually have CAD drawings of Hamrin. To Ray's question, I guess you can all see it, is are there details about the enclosures? And we do have drawings of the parts for that. And we don't have CAD drawings for the spectral robot yet, but I'm sure that Alan will be capturing those at some point in the future. It does take a high level of DIY skills. You've built furniture, you can probably build one of these enclosures. The tolerances are tight, and but I would encourage you to do so if you have a need for one.
And Ray, regarding your other question, BSM Texas is at the, what do they call it, DSO?
DSOC, Dark Sky Observatory Consortium.
Right. And it has a microwave link to a tower, which then has a landline internet connection from there. And so the bottleneck is the microwave link to that tower. And right now it's quoted at 10 megabits per second both ways. And it's actually exceeding that a little bit right now. But just a few weeks ago, it was under a megabit per second. So it was pretty slow to move things back and forth. But there is no direct internet connection to the site.
On the other hand, it's the darkest location in North America. So everything's a trade-off.
The other problem with Texas is not only is it dark, which is great, but the seeing is very good at that site, typically somewhere between 1 and 2 arc seconds. And Dave is undersampled. And so that's why we keep talking about this defocusing stuff, is because if you focus the telescope, it's 1 pixel. And you just can't do photometry with that. And so we want to defocus to at least 2 pixels, 2 to 3 pixels is what we would like for doing photometry at that site. And so you have to figure out, well, how many focus units do you defocus in order to make that happen? And so that's the thing that we're trying to do in a global sense for all the projects.
What about getting him a CMOS camera instead?
Can be done. It's just a question of whether Dave wants to do that. I mean, he has his own science that he wants to do at that site too.
Well, we take it as it goes, but I'm here to support the group. You know, ideally, you know, I'm an outlier in that I've still got a CCD camera, and you know, if we want to have all the sites have exactly the same equipment eventually, and we could get, if we could get another 7-inch astrograph through Techmon, you know, we could sell off some of my equipment and you know, have a completely uniform site there. I wouldn't be opposed to that either.
Yeah, it's a hard question because it's a really nice refractor. That Teleview has superb images. But I think we would have the ability to get more of the E180s. They have quite a number of them that are just sitting on the shelf. It's just a question of asking them for it. And if you ask them for it, then they want to know, what have you done with the ones that you've already given us or we've already given you? And so you just have to, you know, answer all the politics involved. But regarding the the CMOS camera, we actually do have a spare. That camera, though, is being sent back to ZWO for repairs, but it will come back to us one of these days. And so we actually do have a spare. And so it could go on BSM Texas if we wanted to go that route. And that has 2.4 micron pixels as opposed to the 5.4 that you have with the 8300 chip. And so we would actually be properly sampled at that point for the BSM Texas. So it's just a question whether you want to do it.
Yeah, I'm here for the group. If that works out better for everybody, then that's fine. And that could be a step towards transforming it to a completely similar setup in all sites. And I think the advantage there is if there's a problem and you can check it out in New Hampshire, everybody's going to have this, or we want to make another alteration in the future, you know, we're all uniform. So I think that's in the long run, I think that's where it's going to go. But, you know, I think take our time, one thing at a time.
I guess I would have thought that was a relatively cost-effective change since we've already got the camera.
Right.
It would have resolved all the problems we had with Don Collins's campaign, because we can take much shorter images and therefore don't have to defocus as much, and we get the sampling correctly. Anyway.
So we'll keep that on the agenda.
Question. What's the status of MSO? Are they going to join the AVSO net?
MPO.
MPO.
Right, Madrona Peak. That's, I think Dave and I were working on that. I think you wanted to send it before Stella or something like that before we actually make any kind of approval. For those that don't know, this is a 24-inch telescope in the foothills of Texas hill country. And it is extremely well set up. It's a full professional system. It has a Arcos 24-inch with a 4K by 4K camera and 20 some odd different filters. Really nice setup. And so that's why I was kind of hoping to add it to AVSONet. It's a minor cost in that it means Cliff and George have to do the software to add a new telescope to the network, and to Ken to add in any kind of projects that we might want. But I think it would be a good addition. But I would also like to have Stella's approval that we can add such a system to AVSONet, and would be okay with that.
It's in the works. I see we've just added Mr. Romanov from Russia. Say hello. I enjoyed your presentation the other day. So tell us where in Russia you're from. You'll have to unmute.
Philip, where in Russia are you located?
Unmute your microphone.
He knows. He's translating into English.
Hello.
Hello. Where in Russia are you from?
We are from Russia. Now we are in Primorsky Krai of Russia, on the coast of the Sea of Japan. It's night here, morning, and it's far east of Russia.
How far are you from Vladivostok?
6 o'clock.
I don't know how many of you saw or watched his presentation the other day, but he was using data mining.
Yes, on the first day, I speak with my presentation about my discovery.
New variable stars, right?
Yes.
All right. All right, well, I think we've pretty much covered, unless there's any new business, anything else the group wants to bring up. I was going to suggest that rather than trying to compete with Santa Claus, we move our next monthly meeting towards the end of January. At a tentative date of staying with January 26th. Does that work for everybody? All right, well, remind everybody to send me your presentations from today so I can put them in the minutes, and I'll get that to you, back to you all within a week or so. And everybody stay safe, have good holidays, and we'll meet again next year. All right, take care. Carry on.
Dave, is that at 3 o'clock the usual time on the 26th of January?
That would be, yeah, that's the time that seems to work for both coasts. 3 o'clock Eastern time.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank you.
take care. Good to talk to you, Philip.